Matthew, chapter 27. Book of Matthew, chapter 27. All four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, give account of the crucifixion of Christ. All four bring us to the place of the crucifixion. We read here in verse 33 of Matthew 27, and when they were come into the place called Golgotha. Mark records in Mark 15:22, and they bring him unto the place of Golgotha. John writes in John 19:17, they went forth unto a place of the skull, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Golgotha. And Luke writes in Luke 23:33, and when they were come to the place which is called Calvary. Same place. Calvary is the Latin word for Golgotha. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all mention the place by name. It's a significant place. This place called Golgotha, or Calvary, was a small, elevated, rocky knoll. And we know from Hebrews 13:12 that was outside of the walls of Jerusalem, just outside of the city. And we gather from John 19, verses 41 and 42, that there was a burial ground nearby. So this place called Golgotha, or Calvary, it's the place where the Romans would put guilty criminals to death. And their mode was crucifixion. And there is Jesus. And we want to read today for our text, verse 36. And sitting down, they watched him there. What we believe here, I believe, has direct reference to the Roman soldiers. But there may have been, and probably were, others who sat down as well and watched him there. And that's our subject. They watched him there. They watched him there. Now it's important that we realize that there were many that beheld this event from different vantage points. In verse 38, we see there were two thieves being crucified, one on each side. So they saw what happened. In verse 39, there were those who just happened to walk by. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads. In verse 41, there are the chief priests and elders. This would be the religious crowd. In verse 47, we read of those that stood there. And in verse 54, there was the centurion. And we read concerning him watching Jesus. In verse 55, we read, and many women were there beholding afar off. And Luke informs us in Luke 23:49 that there were others with these women, and all his acquaintance and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things. Also in Luke 23:48 we read, and all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done. So the people that were there saw from various vantage points. They saw and they felt different things depending upon their perception of Jesus Christ. So we want to consider, first of all, the events, just by way of background, leading up to our text of Jesus in Golgotha. On the evening of the Passover, Jesus was betrayed and he was arrested. And we read in Matthew 26:56, then all the disciples forsook him and fled. And according to John 18, verses 13 and 14, he was then bound and he was led away to Annas, the father-in-law to Caiaphas. And from there, Matthew 26:57, he was led away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders, the religious crowd, were assembled. Caiaphas began to question Jesus concerning the accusations against him. And it was determined in Matthew 26:66, he is guilty of death. He is guilty of death. Now notice in Matthew 26, after that he is guilty of death, notice verse 67 and verse 68, then did they spit in his face and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy unto us, thou Christ, who is he that smote thee? The next morning, Matthew 27, verses 1 and 2, he was led away to Pilate, who was the governor. And we read in Luke's account, Luke 23, verse 2, that they said to Pilate, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Pilate questioned Jesus regarding this in Luke 23 and verse 4. And he came to this conclusion: I find no fault in this man. That is, there's no basis for your accusation. Pilate questioned Jesus, and the response of the people, I find no fault in this man. Luke 23:5, away with him, crucify him. It was at this point that Pilate discovered that Jesus belonged to the jurisdiction of Herod. And Pilate very gladly sent Jesus to Herod. And then Herod, of course, would proceed to question him, and he too found nothing worthy of death in him. Notice in Luke chapter 23, in verse 11. Luke 23, verse 11. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught, and mocked him, and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. So he finds no fault in him, but they take the time to mock Christ, and then they send him back to Pilate. So Jesus is again before Pilate, and Pilate in Luke 23:13 called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people. And he said unto them, and I paraphrase, neither I nor Herod have found anything worthy of death in this man. Pilate wants to set Christ free, but he wants to do so without compromising himself in the eyes of his superiors. And he makes reference to a custom that was regularly practiced. The custom of releasing a prisoner during the Passover. So Pilate thinks, since some prisoner must be released and set free, he thinks, this is my opportunity to release the innocent Christ. I know he's not guilty. And this is my opportunity to set him free. So he offers to chastise Jesus. No reason to do so, but he's just trying to save himself. And set him free. And crucify Barabbas, who at that time was the most notorious of all their criminals. But the people in unison cried out in Luke 23:18, away with this man, Jesus, and release unto us Barabbas. They say, no, you let Barabbas go free. Jesus must die. And Pilate could hardly believe what he was hearing. So he made the offer the second time. And again, the same response, Luke 23:20. And a third time. And again, the response of the people, crucify him, crucify him. And then notice Luke 23:24. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. At this time, according to Matthew's account, Matthew 27:26, Pilate scourged Jesus and delivered him to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. And what transpired next is recorded in verses 27 through 31 of Matthew chapter 27. So the Roman soldiers bring Jesus into the common hall. We read of this again in verse 27 through 31. Suddenly he's surrounded by a host. They strip him of his clothes, dress him in a royal robe, and they stand before him. They placed a crown of thorns upon his head. They placed a reed in his hand and mockingly said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit upon him. And they took the reed out of his hand and beat upon his head. And as they did so, those thorns were driven further into his skull. So there's Jesus. His head is embedded with a crown of thorns. The flesh of his back has been torn to shreds. The muscles and the tissues have been lacerated by the scourging. His face is bloodied and bruised, and upon that face is the spittle of sinful man. And he's being mocked. And they would then place a heavy cross upon his bleeding and pulverized back, and they say, and they led him away to crucify him. And as they're making their way to the place of crucifixion, Golgotha, there are people in front of him. They're clearing the way, keep the procession moving. There are people beside him. There are people behind him. And the vast majority of the people are anxious for him to be crucified. Well, they think it's moving too slow. So to speed up the process, they force a man by the name of Simon to carry the cross upon which Jesus was to be crucified. And then we read in Matthew 27:33, and when they were come unto the place called Golgotha. This is the place where the demands and the consequences of a broken law were carried out. It is the place of ultimate punishment. It is a designated place of suffering. It is a place of torture. It is a place of unspeakable pain. A place of misery, a place of sorrow. a place of heartbreak, a place of execution, the very place of condemnation. Once you're led to this place, you're not leaving it. You're going to die. And when they were come unto the place called Golgotha, it was a place that always meant a sure death. It was a place that meant an agonizing death. It was a place of great humiliation, a place of indignity, a place of disgrace. It is a place that struck fear in the hearts of men. It was an abominable place. Having arrived at this place, verse 34, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall. And when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. They would do this to render the one who was being crucified insensible of the pains. So it was the purpose was to deaden the pain to some degree. Christ, knowing this, when he had tasted of it, refused to drink it. He was unwilling to blunt the pains of dying. And it was at this point that the cross was taken from Simon, and they lay the cross upon the ground, and a Roman soldier would take a hammer and spikes, and he would nail one hand and then the other to the cross, and then the feet. And then the cross would be lifted up from the ground. And when that happened, the ligaments and the bones of the wrist were supporting all the weight of the entire body. And that cross would be thrust into the ground, and all the bones would then come out of joint. Notice verse 35, the last part of the verse. After that had taken place, they parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. So the Roman soldiers remove his clothes, and believing that those clothes could be sold, they gamble for them. And then we read in verse 36, and sitting down, they watched him there. And sitting down, they watched him there. So we want to view now these individuals watching Christ. Again, there were two thieves crucified with Christ. So as you face the three crosses, there's one on the left, there's one on the right, and upon these two crosses are the usual criminals that you would expect to find. But there's also a cross in the middle. And everyone's attention is focused upon that middle cross. We read, and sitting down, they watched him there. It doesn't say they watched them, but it says they watched him there. The inscription above the cross, verse 37, and set up over his head his accusation written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." This is Jesus. And they watched him there. There were many gathered that day. We read in Luke 23:48, and all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done. And all attention is upon him. Watching him there, if we can put ourselves in that place, what is it that we see? Watching him there, we see disdain. and suffering. And as you watch him there, and as you listen, you realize that the one upon that center cross is far more despised, far more hated and shunned than the two guilty thieves upon the other crosses. May I say that has not changed. That has not changed. Watching him there and listening, you get the sense that there is far more scorn and disgust and hostility and animosity shown to the one on that center cross than the two selfish thieves upon the other crosses. It's no different today. People get more upset at someone who mentions the name of Christ than the abominations that go on all around. It hasn't changed because man's nature hasn't changed. We read in Matthew 27:39 that some passed by. And as they did, it says they reviled him, they cursed him, wagging their heads, shaking their heads. Notice verse 40. And saying, these are those who just walking by, thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days. He didn't do that. That was the false accusation. Save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. The chief priests were there. We read in verse 41, likewise also the chief priests, mocking him. If thou be the Christ, come down. Save yourself. And they said this with the scribes and the elders. He saved others. That was true. Oh, how true that was. He saved others. They're not only mocking him, they're mocking those he saved as well. He saved others. Himself he cannot save. And that is true also. Because he's there to save others. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. But they wouldn't. They had miracle upon miracle, and they refused to believe. He trusted in God. Let God deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And in verse 44, the thief on this side and the thief on this side, they too join in the mocking. The thieves also, which were crucified with him, cast the same in his teeth. Watching him there and listening, you detect that the one upon that center cross is viewed to be far more despicable and vile than the two thieves upon the other crosses. Watching him there and listening, you can feel the malice. You can feel the contempt. You can feel the indignation and the irritation toward Jesus Christ. They're irritated with him. And the mockery and the ridicule that fill the air are directed toward him. The people are attacking and denouncing him. Watching him there, we see that his head again is embedded with a crown of thorns. The blood runs down his face from that. His body is mutilated and mangled. Large Roman spikes have been driven through his hands and feet. His bones are out of socket. His back has been pulverized by scourging. Bruises all over his face, so much so. We read in Isaiah 52 that he does not even look like the face of a man. And watching him there, we see that he's far more mangled than the two thieves. And his suffering is much more intense than that of the thieves. Watching him there, you see the wounds, you see the bruises, you see the lacerations. And you feel the unimaginable misery and anguish and torment and travail of soul. But watching him there also, not only do we see and sense the disdain, but we see his person. We see who he is. Watching him there, you cannot help but notice the inscription upon the cross is quite different. It's not the usual inscription. Thief, murder. You see, they would have an inscription of what crime they were guilty of. So it's not the usual inscription. This inscription simply reads, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." So as you're watching him on that cross, you cannot help but see those words. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And there he is. He's despised. He's rejected. He's stricken. He's smitten. He's afflicted. He's wounded. He's bruised. He's chastised. Has travail of soul. And then your eyes glance up. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And as we watch him, those words need to sink deep into our hearts. This is Jesus. Tell you what, I don't believe those words ever left him. Those who watched him there that day, I believe those words were ingrained in their minds. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. It's not Barabbas, the one who deserved to be there. Read the inscription. This is Jesus. The Almighty One. The eternal, omniscient, all-sufficient God. In a body of human flesh. So watching him there, we see God in a human body. Watching him there, I see one who is perfectly pure. No one's ever seen one perfectly pure. He's perfectly holy. He's harmless. He has not caused harm to anyone. He's undefiled. He's without fault. He's sinless. He's innocent. Yet, he is there where the most violent and dishonest of men have been brought. He is there where the most filthy, and the most wicked, and the most vile and repulsive of mankind has been brought to face the consequences of their crimes. There he is. Who is he? This is Jesus, the one who went about doing good. He healed the sick. He gave sight to the blind. He gave hearing to the deaf. He gave strength to the crippled. He gave cleansing to the defiled. He set at liberty those that were possessed. And He even gave life unto the dead. And there He is. In a place of suffering, a place of torture, misery, and death. And there He is, dying the death of a criminal, being treated as if He were the worst of all criminals. And watching Him there, there's that inscription. You can't get away from it. This is Jesus. This is Jesus, the very one of whom the angel said to Joseph, Thou shalt call His name Jesus, for He shall save His people from their sins. And there He is, the one who came to save. This is Jesus. The one who left the adorations and the coronations and the majesties and the praises and the riches of heaven to submit Himself to the abominations and the condemnation and the miseries and the persecutions and the poverty of earth in order to save a people. There He is. Never has one stooped so low. Came all the way from heaven. And there He is in Golgotha. Never has one stooped so low. What is His name? Jesus. This is Jesus. Why is He there? He's there for me. He's there for me. Watching Him there, we need to remember that. We need to remember why He's there. We know why the thief on this side, the thief on this side, they're there because they're thieves. They're there because they've broken laws. Looking on the cross on the left and the one on the right, reading the inscription, we know why they're there. They're thieves. But looking at that center cross and seeing the inscription, there's no crime. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. The passerby, who was just unaware, might ask, why is He there? Why is He there? We know while the other two are there, thieves. But why is that one in that center cross there? And the truthful answer would be, He's there as God's offering. He's there as God's offering for sinners. He's there out of love for others. He's there in the place and in the stead of others. And the truth is, He's there because He wants to be. Those thieves don't want to be there. You offer them the opportunity to leave there, they're leaving. But Jesus is there because He wants to be there. Because this is what He came into the world for. To save His people from their sins. This is Jesus. Why is He there? Again, He's there for me. This is Jesus. And though He is without sin, and though He has broken no law, there He is, dying the death of the worst of criminals. And in doing so, He does that for me. And in my place. And you gaze above and you see that inscription. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. The reason that this one named Jesus is in this place dying upon a cross is because He took upon Himself every one of my sins. And there He is. All the vileness, all the filth of every one of my sins. There He is with all the guilt of all that sin. And we read, this is Jesus. And there He is. The debt of all my sin upon Him, the entire load, was put upon Him. And He voluntarily, willingly, and on purpose, with a heart of love, went to this place called Golgotha for me and in my place. Again, read the inscription. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And watching Him there, He is wounded, He is bruised, He is lacerated, He's punished, He's oppressed and tormented for me and in my place. This is Jesus. Has all my sin, the entire filthy load. And He goes to the cross. And in my place, endured the wrath of God that was due those sins. Again, read the inscription. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. He received what my sins deserved, what I deserved, at the hand of God. Again, read the inscription. This is Jesus. Watching Him there, I see the one who paid my sin debt. The debt I could not pay. Well, I've been baptized. That will not pay one debt of sin. Not one. Watching Him there, we see that it was for those He came to save, that He was despised and rejected and made so sorrowful and put to grief. This is Jesus. Watching Him there, I see God sparing not His Son for me. For me. Well, when I get to the judgment, I just hope that God will spare me. He spared not His Son. He spared not His Son. Your only hope is in Him. You have no other. Watching Him there, I see a price that was paid for me. Watching Him there, I don't merely see a good man dying a terrible death. We do not merely see a brave man dying for truth. We do not just merely see a man dying as a result of Roman injustice. This is Jesus. This is Jesus, the Son of God, dying for me. This is God in flesh, dying for me in my place. Also, watching Him there, I see unparalleled love. I see a love that is beyond amazing. Watching him there, we see unprecedented love. There's never been a love like this. It's active, it's sacrificial love. It's infinite, it's invincible. Watching him there, I know that he loves me, a sinner. This is a fact that is indescribable. It's incomprehensible. He loves me. This is a fact that's incomparable. It cannot be equaled. He, the one whom the heavens cannot contain, He, the one who is higher than all and who needs nothing from me, loves me. And as you watch him there, you cannot help but see this love that he has for us. For us that are saved, watching him there greatly humbles us and fills us with gratitude and fills us with love for him. How can you not love him? How can you not want to serve him? Watching him there causes us to feel an indebtedness to him. And it stirs us to honor him and to praise him. Watching him there causes us to have a desire to exalt him and to bow before him and to worship him and live for him. How can you not? Watching him there, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you? It means something to everyone here. It all depends on your perception of who Jesus is. The Roman soldiers, for the most part, they watched him there. Meant nothing. Because Jesus meant nothing. Those who passed by and shook their heads, same thing. And on we could go. But what does it mean to you watching him there? What do you see? What do you feel? If you're here and not saved, can you see Jesus on that cross with your sin, with every single one of them, with all the filth, and he's dying in your place. He's paying a sin debt that you cannot pay. You are a sinner, guilty before God. And you have a debt that you cannot pay. Well, I'm doing the best I can. It comes short. It's not enough. It's not enough. You go into the store. You pick up something that costs $15. You hand the cashier $10. They'll say, I need $5 more. Well, I'm doing the best I can. It's not enough. It's not enough. You can't pay it. You can't pay your sin debt. No matter what you do, it cannot be paid. No one can pay it for you other than this one. This is Jesus. So if you can see Him on that cross dying in your place, that's what you need to put your trust in. Put all your trust in that. That's what I'm trusting in today. That's what most here are trusting in today. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And I believe that after Christ was crucified, there were many things they couldn't get out of their minds, those who were there. But I believe this is one that they couldn't get out of their mind. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And on the day of Pentecost, over 3,000 souls were saved. And I believe it's the very ones that Jesus prayed for. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The very ones who were there, that cross, and they couldn't get that out of their minds. This is Jesus. Oh, that might be engraved upon our hearts. This is Jesus. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in verse of song.